Casa Mariposa is an intentional community that operates a house of hospitality for people coming out of Border Patrol detention. And when people come out of Border Patrol detention, in our experience, in this particular group we're working with, they are released to the Greyhound bus station with very few resources. So the majority of the work we do is at the Greyhound bus station. We give people food bags, we exchange pesos, we let people use our phone to call their families to arrange the purchasing of tickets. We explain tickets and translate things into Spanish for people. We provide diapers, and all sorts of small things like that. And it's only when families cannot buy a bus ticket out the same night that they're released that they come to our house and spend the night. Casa Mariposa is connected with a group called No More Deaths, which does humanitarian aid work on the U.S.-Mexico border. They're not the only humanitarian aid group, but they are one of the most active groups in this particular region. There's many specific trails and water drops that have been mapped out over the last 10 years in the Tucson sector of the desert. And basically what No More Deaths does is leaves water, food, socks, and blankets at specific strategic points on migrant trails, places where trails come together and things like that, in the hopes that people that are traveling can use those resources and that can help alleviate death and suffering in the desert. They also operate a camp, which has been there for about 10 years, on and off. It's now there full time, and there's always volunteers there, and they have a medical tent with all of the medical resources that you would need to help someone who has been traveling in the desert for several days.
I do several different things with No More Deaths. There's a lot of different components of the organization. One of them is Desert Aid, and I am a volunteer with Desert Aid. So that means just that I go out to our camp in the desert as often as I can, and basically camp out there for periods of time, and every day I'll go out on different water drops and put water and food in the desert, hike the migrant trails, and if I find anybody, we provide medical aid and any food or water that's necessary.
So the border wall and border militarization cause a lot of death and suffering in the desert, but the checkpoint is the biggest thing that deters people or makes the journey lethal. Because the farther north you move the checkpoint, that requires people to walk a longer distance to get some kind of pickup or some kind of transportation out of the desert, instead of just hiking a couple miles and then being able to jump in a car and drive the rest of the distance. So if you move, the checkpoint is now 20 miles north of the border, so that means people need to walk at least that distance.
No More Deaths has a alternative spring break program that they run every year. Basically as sort of an education program, so they bring in different college students from across the country, and really I guess anybody who wants to come spend a week here in Desert Aid with us, sort of as a learning opportunity. So they'll spend the week out in the desert with long-term volunteers that have been around and know what's happening there, and sort of shadow those long-term volunteers and put out water and food in the desert and sort of get the experience of what it actually looks like on the border, because I think it's hard to really understand that from far away unless you actually see it in real life. And they also come back here and go through No More Deaths training and all this, so that they can sort of contextualize everything that's happening on the border as well. So it's sort of an educational opportunity, and the idea is that once they return to their where they came from, their school or hometown or anything, that they can spread that knowledge and whatever they learned, and that's really the main goal for that. And so I came for the first time in 2012 with my school when I was in school, and they send people here every year to do that. So I got kind of hooked and came back the next summer and haven't left. So
I think leaving water out in the desert the way that No More Deaths does, in a very sort of measured and strategic way, is a good way to try and make an attempt to prevent some of the death and suffering that occurs along the U.S.-Mexico border. I think it's sort of a drop in the bucket, but I often feel overwhelmed by the amount of work that needs to be done and the amount of problems in the world, and so it feels good to be doing something that will hopefully at least matter to someone. You know, if I spend a week in the desert and I carry
maybe like 30 or 40 gallons and put them places in the desert, and only 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 get used, that's like 10 people that have twice as much water as they would have. So even though it's a little difference, it could make the biggest difference in the world to one person.